This dictation from Progressive Exercise 22. Ready? Start. This legislative reality has in effect led to a deep fissure in the landscape of banking regulatory terrain, a system of dual regulation by the Finance Ministry in addition to RBI. I will now take a few minutes to explain why this fissure or the fault line is bound to lead to tremors such as the most recent fraud. Temptation to engage in fraud at the level of employee or employees is always present in banks, be it in public sector or private sector. The question then is whether there is adequate deterrence faced by employees from undertaking frauds and enough incentives for management to put in place preventive measures to preempt frauds. In case of banks, three potentially powerful mechanisms could induce discipline against frauds. Firstly, investigative vigilance, legal deterrence, criminal investigation of frauds, and attached penalties can serve as an effective deterrence if reporting and investigation are expedient and penalties are adequately served relative to the gains from fraudulent activity. Secondly, market discipline fraudulent activity can be a net loss to the bottom line. In this case, bank investors would impose deterrence that is uninsured creditors might run on the bank, inducing liquidity problems, or shareholders might exit effectively, raising the cost of capital and inducing solvency questions. Para. In anticipation of such disruptive outcomes that might cause loss of control, management and board members may put in place governance mechanisms to prevent or reduce the incidence of fraud and the or hold larger buffer in the capital structure to bear losses when fraud materializes. Thirdly, regulatory discipline banks in most parts of the world, however, have a significant portion of deposit funding that is insured, and since banks serve critical payments and settlements function, they are often too big to fail or too many to fail. Hence, a part of the market discipline is weakened as a trade off with financial stability and is substituted by delegation of supervisory and regulatory powers to a banking regulator. Detection and punishment by the regulator then need to be effective to discipline fraud. How do these mechanisms work in case of private and public sector banks in India? Investigative and formal enforcement process takes in our country, perhaps for the right reasons, a fair bit of time. Indeed, RBI data on banking fraud suggests that only a handful of cases over the past 5 years have had closure as such. Para. It is fair to say that in case of private sector banks, the real deterrence arises from market and regulatory discipline and their confluence. A private bank CEO's primary concern is whether he will be able to raise capital when the need arises, or even whether he will still be running the bank the next day. The point is that they could be readily whether will be still be running the bank the next day. The point is that they could be readily cautioned through their boards and even replaced by the RBI in case of larger or precedent irregularities. Further, a private bank failing to meet bank solvency standards and under RBI's prompt corrective action would find it hard to raise capital, whereby it would need to put the house in order at swift notice so it can raise funding from markets and get back to growth path. In turn, there are incentives to invest in governance so as to limit frauds and regulatory violations and to respond with alacrity when incidents do arise. In contrast, the market discipline mechanism for public sector banks is appreciably weaker compared to that at private banks. There is implicitly a stronger perceived sovereign guarantee for all creditors of PSBs and the principal shareholder. The government has not so far been interested in fundamentally modifying the ownership structure. From an economic standpoint, this weakened market discipline should imply that the government would prefer stronger regulatory discipline of these banks, not weaker. Para. However, as I explained above at length, and perhaps since the original idea behind bank nationalization was complete government control over credit allocation to the economy, the situation in India is exactly the reverse. RBI's regulatory powers over PSBs are weaker than those over the private sector banks. The BR Act exemptions for PSBs mean that the one agency, the regulatory, that can respond relatively quickly against banking funds or irregularities cannot take effective action. Hence, for example, MDs at PSBs find it comfortable to tell media that business will be as usual for them under RBI's prompt corrective action framework, as even if they do not meet the stipulated restrictions of the framework, the ultimate authority over their tenure is with the government and not with the RBI. It is not entirely surprising that there has been a recurring theme in report after report on financial sector reforms in the country that has suggested of PSB governance through improvements in top management and board member appointments or ownership neutrality in banking regulatory powers or improving market discipline by considering a variety of diverse ownership structures will be let another opportunity to catalyze fundamental reform at PSVs pass by. Stop.